Crimson Shadows, Part 1. Chapter 1. The Encounter. The city pulsed with life, a tangled web of secrets and power plays hidden beneath its glittering skyline. The rain had started hours ago, soft and persistent, painting the streets with shimmering reflections of neon lights. Detective Elena Vega leaned against her unmarked car, her arms crossed tightly as she watched the warehouse across the street. She had been here for hours, her patience stretched thin but her resolve as sharp as ever. This was her life. Long nights in the cold, chasing shadows and whispers. Her informant's intel had better be right. Victor Castellano, the city's most elusive and dangerous mafia boss, was supposed to be here. The man was a ghost, always slipping through the cracks, his power extending far beyond the reach of the badge she wore. Victor Castellano. The name alone carried weight in every dark corner of the city. He wasn't just a criminal. He was a force. His hands were stained with blood, but his mind was sharper than any blade. He operated with a code of loyalty and precision that made him both feared and admired. He was untouchable, or so it seemed. Elena's fingers tightened around her coat as she scanned the street again. The door to the warehouse creaked open, spilling faint light onto the wet pavement. A tall figure emerged, his silhouette immediately commanding her attention. It was him. Victor Castellano stepped into the rain like he owned the night itself. His tailored suit clung perfectly to his broad shoulders, the kind of confidence in his stride that could silence a room without a single word. Elena's breath hitched despite herself. She had seen his face in surveillance photos, but in person, he was striking. But then his gaze lifted, cutting through the darkness. Their eyes met, and the world seemed to freeze. His expression didn't falter, his lips curving into a faint, knowing smirk. It was as if he had been expecting her, as if her presence was part of his plan. He held her gaze for a moment longer before turning and disappearing back into the warehouse. Elena's heart raced as she straightened, her instincts screaming at her to act. Yet she stayed rooted to the spot, the weight of his stare lingering long after he was gone. Chapter 2. A Game of Shadows. Victor Castellano leaned back in his chair, the soft glow of a desk lamp casting long shadows across the dark wood of his office. His men moved in the background, hauling crates and exchanging orders, but his attention was elsewhere. He swirled the whiskey in his glass, his mind replaying the brief encounter from earlier. Detective Elena Vega. Her name had reached him weeks ago, whispered with both fear and intrigue. She had been making waves in the department, her relentless pursuit of justice carving a path through the city's darkest corners. Now, it seemed, she had set her sights on him. "You're smiling," Luca said, breaking Victor's thoughts. Luca was his right-hand man, a loyal enforcer who rarely questioned him. That's never a good sign. Victor chuckled softly, setting his glass down. "She's different. Most detectives are predictable, driven by ambition or revenge. But she's complicated. She's trouble," Luca muttered. Victor's smirk deepened. Trouble keeps things interesting. Meanwhile, Elena paced her small apartment, her thoughts a whirlwind of frustration and curiosity. She had planned every detail of her surveillance, and yet Victor had seen through her. He wasn't just bold, he was calculated, a step ahead of her at every turn. She poured herself a glass of wine, staring out the window at the city lights. Why did he smirk like that? Why didn't he run? The questions gnawed at her, making sleep impossible. When the next lead came, she didn't hesitate. It was a shipment on the docks, the kind of operation that reeked of Castellano's handiwork. Elena arrived early, her weapon ready, her heart pounding with anticipation. But when the boat finally docked, the crates were empty. "Looking for something, detective?" The voice sent a shiver down her spine. Deep, smooth, and far too close. She spun around, her hand on her weapon, only to find Victor Castellano standing a few feet away. He was alone, his posture relaxed, as if he were meeting an old friend instead of a sworn enemy. "You're bold," she said, her tone sharp, though her pulse quickened. "Coming here alone." Victor's eyes glimmered with amusement. "Boldness is a matter of perspective. Some might say the same about you." Her jaw tightened. "You're playing a dangerous game." "Life's a dangerous game," he replied, stepping closer. "But tell me, detective, why do you care so much?" What is it about me that keeps you awake at night? Her breath hitched. His words were too direct, his presence too disarming. She forced herself to stand tall. You don't scare me, Castellano. No, he said softly, his smirk fading. That's what makes this so dangerous. Chapter 3. The collision. Their encounters became a dance, each step drawing them closer to the edge of something neither dared name. For every move Elena made, Victor countered, their paths crossing in shadowed alleys and crowded streets. Elena hated how much he intrigued her. She should despise him, and yet, there was a part of her that couldn't look away. Victor, for his part, found himself lingering on thoughts of her. Her fire, her unwavering sense of right and wrong. It was a stark contrast to the world he had built. And yet, he couldn't resist the pull she had on him. It all came to a head on a stormy night. Elena had followed a lead to an abandoned factory, only to find herself surrounded. 3 of Victor's men stepped from the shadows, their weapons drawn. Her heart raced, but she held her ground. You don't scare me, she said, her voice steady despite the fear curling in her chest. She's braver than she looks, Victor said, stepping into view. Elena's eyes narrowed. Is this how it ends? You're too afraid to face me alone. Victor chuckled, a low, dangerous sound. If I wanted you dead, detective, you'd already be gone. This is just a warning. Then what are you waiting for? She shot back. Victor held her gaze, his expression unreadable. Because I don't want to hurt you, Elena. Not yet. The storm raged around them, thunder rumbling in the distance. And in that moment, something shifted.